actually, let me start by giving a little bit of the background on the whole drought issue. I worked for about 25 years in Central America with green manure cover crops and never really realized that they had such an impact on drought because we didn't have very many droughts in Guatemala and Honduras in those days. But I've been working in the drought-prone areas of Africa the last 10 years, and boy, it's clear as it's absolutely clear. What's happened is that farmers have had to stop planting forests, what we call, or not planting them, but letting forests grow for 10 or 15 years in their fields, and then cutting them down, burning them, and planting. Okay. Now I realize burning right now it's a terrible thing to be doing, but in those days, first of all, the forest didn't burn, just start burning and burn and burn and burn, because things were much more moist. In fact, this last year, there's been a lot of publicity around the world about the burning in Brazil, and to some extent the burning in the Congo, which is just as bad, but fewer people know about it. And they didn't get the real story. You know, they were talking about, well, the president's new policies in Brazil and all this sort of thing, and that there was lots of burning and so on. Well, there's always been lots of burning. In Brazil, there's always been lots of burning. What's changed, and this is dramatically important, especially for those of you who believe in global warming, is that now the forest will burn spontaneously. You light a match, it will burn and burn and burn and burn and burn in some areas, not everywhere. That wasn't true. That's not the nature of a humid tropical forest. It's not supposed to burn spontaneously. And the same thing is happening in Congo. Why is it happening in Congo, all the way from the Congo to Brazil? The same thing in almost the same year. The problem is that as the earth gets hotter, the forests get drier, and now forests that would never burn spontaneously are burning like mad. And that's the big issue in Brazil. Partly because they never had spontaneous forest fires in the jungle, and so they don't have the equipment, they don't have the chemicals, they don't have the experience, they don't have the organization, they don't have anything to battle these things once they get really going. And this is what in climate change science people call a feedback mechanism. It's like the methane or the ice caps on Greenland. It means that the more global warming you have, the more the global warming itself causes more global warming, even if humans didn't add to it. So things are going to get bad, okay? Actually, I know about this particular issue because I worked with the World Wildlife Fund back in the beginning of the 90s, and they were already predicting, even then, that this feedback mechanism in the Amazon was going to occur. They didn't know exactly when, but they thought it was going to occur sometime in the next 20 years. Well, they were right on, okay? So, droughts traditionally were caused by a lack of rain. The droughts we're having now are not caused by lack of rain, mostly. Okay, now that sounds strange, but I'll tell you what's happened. Starting in the 1980s, the same time in Africa that people had to start reducing their fallow period from 15 years to 10 years to 8 years to 4 years, and now fallowing is on its deathbed in Africa, across the entire continent. I know because I've worked in, I think it's 23 countries now, okay? In Africa. And 15 countries here in Latin America. And plus quite a few in Asia. What's happening is, and I did a study of this in 2010 and predicted exactly what's happened since then. I mean, everything you're seeing right now in these droughts, the worsening of the droughts, the higher frequency, etc., I predicted in 2009. Okay, and I even wrote an article in, if you want to go back and find out whether I'm telling the truth, I wrote an article in State of the World 2011, the book they write, that World Watch writes each year. There's a whole chapter in there on the coming famine in Africa. Okay, now what I got wrong was I didn't realize the World Food Program had so much food. But the interesting thing is the World Food Program is running out of food. So if you have people that are dependent on food aid, let them know this isn't forever. Okay? And in Africa, we're going to see millions of people dying in the next few years if the World Food Program can't get a lot more food, and I don't think Trump's going to help them one bit. So So what's happened is, as people have had to follow less and less, in other words, let the forest grow less and less on their farmland, the organic matter content of the soil has gone down. You know, back in the 80s in Africa, most people had 3 to 4%, most farmers had 3 to 4% organic matter in their soil. That's almost unheard of now. They're down to 0.5% in most cases. Okay? Now what's that mean? Okay, there's a huge consequence of that, and that is, and this is according to scientific figures from a major scientific study in Malawi, the organic matter, as the organic matter content has gone down, so has the rainwater infiltration rate. The rainwater infiltration rate in Africa has gone from about 60%, something in the neighborhood of 60%, to between 10 and 20%. That means it can rain just as much as it always has, and basically in most of Africa it's raining about the same as it used to. It's much more irregular and much more unpredictable, but the total quantity of rain is pretty much the same as it was 40 years ago. Certainly not different enough to cause droughts. What's changed is that rainwater is all running off instead of going into the soil. You're only getting 10 to 20% of the water going into the soil. The other 80% is running off. In fact, farmers in some countries in Africa will often ask me, what's going on? They say we've got droughts and that we aren't getting enough rain. And it's true, every second or third year we have a drought and our crops don't grow. But those same years we have floods. So what's going on? Why do we have, if it isn't raining enough, why are we having all these floods? Well, usually what I'll do is I'll say, well, after a good 3 or 4 hour rain, how deep does your soil get wet? And they'll say, oh, these days it only gets wet about that deep. Oh, okay, well what happens to all the other water? Oh, it runs off. And then I'll just stop. And about 15 seconds later they'll say, oh, I see. You've answered my question without saying a word. Okay. That is the cause of the droughts we're having. Now, there's, by the way, can most of you see this? If you can't, please come up closer because this is what I'm going to really use. That you can't see anything there. Here you see a very nice cornfield behind this farmer with a bean plant growing up it.
Is it possible to tilt it so it doesn't catch the sky?
Oh, okay. Is that better?
Yeah,
okay. The first thing you can see is he's got one small ear in his left hand here. He's got 2 large ears in the right hand. He's showing us the difference in how much each stalk of maize produces compared with 10 years ago. Okay? He's producing close to 3 times what he used to produce. Okay? He's a typical smallholder farmer from Honduras. The second thing you can see here, you can see he's harvesting a lot of maize. The third thing you can see here, and you can't see it up there, is that the soil here is almost black. Very close to being just absolutely black. Okay? Wasn't that way before. The buildup of organic matter on soils where we use green manures is far beyond what most scientists are willing to believe. Okay? In Guatemala we have experience after experience, in Honduras we have experience after experience where farmers have built up the topsoil by about 2 centimeters a year. Okay? That means in every 3 years they build about 2 inches of topsoil. The old saw about 1 inch of topsoil being produced every 100 years. That's, I don't know where they got that. Well, I do know to some extent. That's starting with a pile of rocks. It's not even starting with soil. So I mean, it's one of these fictions the scientists put on us that just isn't true. Okay? In this field, I don't know how much is built up, but I've seen a lot of fields where you get about that much buildup every year, okay, of topsoil. That's also one of the reasons why I know that when some scientists will start talking about, well, you can only sequester a certain amount of carbon in the soil because after a while the soil fills up with carbon. Well, baloney. Not if it's creating more topsoil every year. It's building topsoil. It's building space for more carbon. Okay. Furthermore, there's another little fact they're forgetting, and that is that all the carbon in the soil all the carbon in the air originally came from the soil. There was a period in the history of the Earth where there was no carbon in the air. All that carbon came from the soil, so we can doggone well put it back. Okay? Now, there is a bit of a fallacy in that we aren't going to be able to put it back under buildings and stuff like that, but still, we've seen no limit in how much carbon, and we've put a whole lot of carbon in soil, not us, but farmers, in some systems like the Mucuna maize system in Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico. They have topsoil visibly. You can see the topsoil is this deep. I'll show you a photo in a minute of what it looks like. It looks like compost. And they built that up in 40 years or less. Okay? And according to soil tests done in 2 different laboratories, because the Cornell professor that was working with this particular student that did this study wouldn't believe that tropical soils could hold 12% organic matter, so they sent it to another lab, and the second lab came back with 12% again. Okay? 12%. That's 6% carbon. Okay? And it goes down that deep. And we're talking tremendous amounts of carbon. Okay, now, well, the other thing you can see in this photo here is tremendously green maize, tall, highly productive. And the last thing the thing that makes me feel best about the photo is that the farmer's son is sitting over here. He happens to be sitting on about a little terrace face of about 30 or 40 centimeters in height because of the grass strip that's across there for soil conservation. So the farmer's keeping the good soil on his land instead of let it wash down some river. But the beautiful thing, he's not only keeping soil on his land, he's keeping his son at home. Okay? In Honduras, we had a program where the migration from the Winope area, and you can go there, I give you the name and everything. It's called Winope, a town fairly near the Zamorano Agricultural School. When the program started there in 1981, the average emigration from the villages of Winope to the city, to the slums, was about 1 family per village per year. When the program left, we did another study of all this sort of thing. The average immigration from Winope into the city was -1 family. In other words, the net immigration was 1 family from the city coming back out to Winope, more than 1 family more than the ones that were going in. There were still a few going in, but the heaviest migration was from the city back out to Winope, for several reasons that we also researched. We went around and asked a lot of these people that had come why they did it. The most interesting one to me, and least expected, was that they said, when we were in Winope before, everybody just considered us dum-dums, because we were the people that were too dumb to do something better in agriculture, so we were still farmers. Nobody respected us. But now, when we take our vegetables, and they now grow in Winope probably 15 or 20 different species of vegetables, and they're finding new ones all the time. It's one of the 2 main cold weather vegetable producing areas in all of the country of Honduras, and they supply southern Honduras and eastern Salvador, okay, with cold weather vegetables. What they said was, now everywhere we go, we get respect. The people in Winope itself, they know what we can do. They know that we're discovering new vegetables and producing high quality vegetables like nobody in this area ever did before, even the rich cats. Okay? And when we go to the market in Tegucigalpa, everybody crowds around us because they know we've got the best quality vegetables in the country. So we get respect everywhere we go. It's a big difference. Okay, so let's go on and talk about the main technology that we're using to overcome droughts is called green manure cover crops. And it includes, well, right now in the world at large, there's somewhere between 20 and 30 million, there's somewhere between 10 and 20 million smallholder farmers that are using green manure cover crops, okay? I mean, scientists are still doing experiments to find out whether they work. I find that laughable. for one thing, they worked in the United States and Europe until the Second World War because nobody had chemical fertilizer and everybody was using green manures. Okay? They don't even know their history, much less their agronomy. Okay. Green manure cover crops. They do work, first of all, and they're very popular with farmers. If you get the right ones, and this is the trick, if you get the right one, because there's over 100 different species in use as I talk, okay, around the world. Over 100 different species of green manure cover crop. You have to get the right ones for the right situation. Now here there's probably 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 species that would be really, really good depending on the particular condition you're in. Anything from perennial peanut to gliricidia trees. Okay? Now, so let's see. This is my own computer. I should know how to use it. You can't even read that, can you? Okay. Okay, the causes of the droughts. I already went through this. Climate change is maybe 10 to 20% of the problem because of the irregularity of rains and the fact that sometimes you get no rain for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks right in the middle of the rainy season. And you're never quite sure when to plant, usually. But 80% of the problem is because of the lack of organic matter in the soil. And I say that partly because a lot of farmers are losing 80% of the rain, but I say it even more so because in the 5 different places I've seen in 5 different countries, Honduras, Mali, Malawi, Zambia, well 6, Mozambique and Madagascar, where people have been using green manure cover crops well for at least 6 years, they're now getting about 3 times in a good year, they're getting 3 times as much productivity as the rest of the farmers. The farmers who have everything the same except they haven't introduced green manure cover crops. Okay? In the bad years, the normal farmers are losing just about everything. They may have a sack or 2 per hectare or something, but they basically have lost everything. They're getting 80% of what they get in the good years. Instead of 3 tons per hectare, they're getting 2.5. Okay? Well, that comes out to about 80%. So 80% of the problem is not caused by the lack of rain, because after all, it rains just as much in their fields as it does their neighbors' fields that don't have the green manures. It's caused by the inability of the soil to allow to enter and to hold the moisture in the root zone. Okay? 80%. And who knows? Maybe after 10 years it'll be 90%. I don't know. I mean, they're still improving their soils. Okay. We've already touched on the rest of that. Okay, what can be done? The bad news is, of course, that when soil is the problem, droughts don't self-terminate. The rain doesn't all of a sudden come and solve the problem, because the problem isn't with the rain. So that's the bad news. These droughts are going to get worse and worse. If anybody thinks it's just a cycle and we're going to come out of it pretty soon, you've got another thought coming. Okay? These droughts are going to get worse and worse and worse. We've already seen it in Africa for the last 15 years. Okay? And like I said, I predicted it back in writing in, 2011? And exactly what I said has happened. I even predicted the countries, except I missed on Ethiopia. I predicted 12 countries, and those are the ones that are most affected by the droughts. Okay? And it's going to happen here. It's going to get worse and worse. Now, once in a while you have a good year, maybe even a couple of years. But it's going to get worse, as long as your soil is getting worse. Okay, the good news is that it's no longer the rain that's causing the problem, it's the soil. We can't change the rain very easily, but we can change our soils. In other words, if we do the right thing, things are going to get better. Ahora hay una solución. Okay? Y esa solución está en nuestras manos. Okay? Okay, now, well, why can't we use animal manure or compost? I mean, these are other organic forms of fertilizer that we could use. And I'm not totally an organic advocate, but I'm pretty close to it. I mean, I still have a hard time watching a family's children go hungry because they weren't able to apply an insecticide to a crop in an emergency. You know, I mean, I still have a hard time with that. But anyway, okay, what can be done? Animal manure. Well, the problem with using organic matter, and this includes green manures, is that it takes a lot of organic matter to rejuvenate our soils. You know, 5 pounds of compost, 5 tons of compost is not going to do you any good on a hectare of land. Forget it. You're wasting your time. Okay? For basic grain crops, now it's different for vegetables, it's different for some high value fruits. Compost can be very, very good. But if you're putting it on maize, it's going to take so much compost that you're going to spend a whole lot more money in terms of the labor involved than you're going to get in terms of increased yields. Okay, do the arithmetic. You'll figure it out, you'll see. The amount of organic matter that takes even just to maintain soil fertility or maintain the organic matter content of your soil is about 10 tons roughly. I mean, it depends on the plants being used and so forth. Is roughly 10 tons per acre, 25 tons per hectare.
Matter,
Pardon?
is that dry matter?
We don't use dry because we don't have any way to dry it. So we're using green weight. Well, of course, animal manure isn't green, but yeah, we're using wet weight. Okay. So we're talking 10 tons per acre per year beyond our maize or maize stover or whatever crop we're using, the crop residues. Okay? That's a lot of organic matter. Okay? We use less than that, and our soil still, it's going to slow down the process, but our soils are still going to be getting worse each year. Okay, so it takes a lot of organic matter. Now, the good news in this situation is that green manure cover crops, all the ones we use very much, will produce far more organic matter than that amount. I mean, they'll produce 15, 20, sometimes 25, well, not 25, 15 to 20, I'm used to working in hectares, but they'll produce 15 to 20 tons per acre. Just, you plant them and they grow and they produce that much. Furthermore, you're producing new organic matter. You're not taking organic matter away from your animals. The free roaming animals that go out and eat stuff. If everybody in a village is making 5 tons of, which won't be enough, but 5 tons of compost, the animals are not going to have a whole lot to eat. In other words, compost processes organic matter. It doesn't produce more organic matter. Green manures produce additional organic matter. Totally different concept, totally different process, and one that's definitely much more needed among smallholder farmers. They need as much organic matter as they can get. With animals, the situation is similar. A smallholder is going to need, well, I'm going to go back to hectares. A smallholder farmer needs about 7 or 8 well-fed cattle to produce enough manure to maintain the soil fertility in 1 hectare of land. That means if the farmer's got 1.5 hectares, for instance, he's got to have 10 cattle, 12 cattle, and they got to be well fed. If a smallholder farmer has those kind of resources, he or she is not poor anymore, by my way of looking at things. That's not a poor farmer. Okay, so it's very rare that our poorer farmers in Central America have that kind of resources. Okay, now, a lot of people don't understand what organic matter can do, partly because our textbooks haven't told us, partly because if you go back and look at the beginning college textbook you had on soils, if you studied soils, you will find that one of the authors of that textbook is in fact an employee of a fertilizer company. Okay? I went to the Mann Library, one of the biggest agricultural libraries in the United States, pulled out 15 different beginning soil texts, all they had. Every single one of them had at least a co-author who was from a fertilizer company. Okay, So they aren't telling you a lot of stuff about green manures. In fact, they're usually saying that green manures aren't any good, you know, which means that all the farmers in Europe and the United States before the Second World War were idiots. They'd been using a technology for years and years and years that didn't work, according to modern scientists, okay? Or a lot of them. Okay, what large quantities of organic matter can do? There was a farmer in Honduras, and this is actually what got us started with green manures, that back in 1981 decided that what we were telling them about organic matter being good, and we didn't know half the story at that time, but we were talking about how organic matter was good and they ought to use their animal manure and so forth. And so he decided, okay, I'm going to find out if these guys are really telling the truth. He made 16 compost heaps, piled it on a small piece of land, and then he planted his maize. Okay, he didn't pile it on, he dug it in. And then planted his maize. He left 2 rows that were outside of the area where he'd put the compost. Okay? Here's the first row. If you can see, if you're up here close, you can see there's little yellow corn plants about ankle high. Okay? The next, whoops. The next row is about this high and sort of yellowish green, and then the rest is 2 meters high and dark green. Okay? This row here is intermediate because it was sending roots over and stealing compost from the next row. Okay? But look at the difference here. That maize, all this maize was planted with the same seed the same day. Okay? I didn't believe him, but I went around and talked to some of the neighbors and they said, yeah, isn't that amazing? Okay? From 0 production to about 4 tons per hectare. Okay? Now, we know from experience since then all over the world, I've worked with green manures in over 50 nations around the world, and they can do this. Now, they can't do it that fast because he really piled on the organic matter. I mean, he put on tremendous quantities of organic matter. But the major problem of soil improvement is not chemical. All you got to do is put on enough biodiverse organic matter. Okay? And by biodiverse, I just mean that along with the grasses, you have enough legumes so you're getting your nitrogen. Okay? If you put on enough organic matter, you'll get whatever level of fertility you can get depending on the amount of organic matter you put in your soil. There's no chemical problem in improving soils, unless you've got a pH of below 4.5, or unless you've got a lack of manganese, which for a weird reason doesn't respond to organic matter, or you've got a problem of salinity. But any other soils, 95% of the world's soils, you can improve with green manure cover crops. You go, if you don't believe me and you've got some wasteland that won't produce anything, go out there, plow it once, and plant some jack bean. I'll bet you 10 to 1, unless you're in an area where the pH is less than 4.5, and I guess there is quite a bit of beliefs that's that way. But, you know, if you've got a pH that's over 4.5, just go out there and plant some jack bean and see what happens. Okay? It's by far the most drought-resistant, poor soil resistant legume that we presently work with on any scale. We've got a couple that are looking even better, but just in a few small places in Africa. Okay, this is what organic matter can do. Now, the first question that comes to mind when you see something like that is, well, why aren't farmers all over the world doing this? Why do we see so many maize fields like this where it's only about that high and all yellow and everything? Well, I mean, farmers are smart. Smallholder farmers are smart. I've worked with some of the ones that have the worst reputations in the world for being dumb, and they aren't. Okay. Why are farmers all over the place doing it? It's because it takes too much compost. Yeah, it's anti-economic. Okay. I mean, anybody can do this if they want to spend a lot of money, pull money out of their pockets, but smallholder farmers by definition don't have that kind of money to pull out of their pockets. Okay? That's why they're doing it. So the problem with soil improvement is an economic problem. It's how can we get enough organic matter in the soil at a cheap enough price with little enough labor so that it makes economic sense. And that's where green manures come in. Green manures, usually at the same time you're improving your soil, you are reducing the amount of labor you're using on your farm. What do you mean reducing? Well, first of all, if a lot of these green manures, after 2 or 3 years, you only have to weed your maize once. You don't have to weed it twice. Why? Because the green manure covers all the weeds. You weed it once, that gives the green manure enough of a chance to get ahead of all the rest of the weeds. You know, forget the second weed. Go home and take a rest. Okay? In Africa, that's particularly important for women. A lot of people are talking about how much work African women have to do, and by the way, they have to do it right during the hunger season. So they have the least amount of food in the house right before the next harvest. And yet you can eliminate one whole weeding, or with cassava, 2 or 3 whole weedings, just by having green manure in there. That's at the same time improving your soil. It's also, some of the green manures we use are trees, so women don't have to go out in the forest and cut down trees. Now, I realize here in Latin America, oftentimes it's the men that has to be firewood, but you know, they can be pretty happy not having to go out and cut down wood in the forest too. And of course, you're helping preserve the forest because you're reducing the pressure on the forest by being able to get at least some of your firewood from your field. Anyway, and there are other ways that we reduce labor with green manure cover crops too. Okay, now, what are we talking about here? I'm not talking about green manures in the traditional sense. Green manures in the traditional sense failed. During the colonial period, they were tried by Europeans and so forth all over Africa and Asia, and they basically failed. Why is that? Because they were trying to do the same thing in the tropics that they did in the cold countries. And there's no reason. The tropics actually, as far as I'm concerned, are a better medium for producing food than the cold countries. We just have to learn the technology that we need for here and not be reading textbooks translated from, or in English, or in Spanish that have been translated from the United States textbooks. They're going to teach you a false kind of agriculture for the tropics. It's great for up there. I mean, they'll say, for instance, oh, you can't intercrop. Well, in the United States, you can intercrop very well. Why? They have a heck of a lot less sunlight than we do. They have a heck of a lot less heat than we do. So they can't intercrop and get the same productivity that we can. Another thing that I've never seen in any textbook, but it just makes logic, or any book at all, it's just logical. The definition of the tropics is that it's somewhere where the sun is directly overhead at least one time in the year, right? Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn, that's as far as the sun gets, and it starts going back toward the equator. Okay? So if you have a maize plant like this, and you have a bean plant like this that you're intercropping, like the Mayans did for centuries, the sun in the United States goes like this. Boom. The maize gets all the sunlight, the beans get nothing. Okay? But here in the tropics, the sun comes down much more directly. Okay? So the maize crop is here, the bean crop is here, the bean gets its sun, the maize crop gets its sun. We can intercrop. And you know, lots of studies show that we get 70, 80, 90% more productivity by intercropping than we can monocropping. So anyway, the textbooks from the United States, we realized in the 70s, textbooks were teaching us all sorts of nonsense. We can grow lab beans all year long and have a very, very high protein animal feed 12 months out of the year. Now the textbooks were telling us that for the winter we had to make silage and hay, which means you spend a whole lot of work, and a whole lot of expense to get an inferior feed. What's this? Okay, that's fine for the cold countries. Don't come and tell me to do it here. Okay. And then we're telling we had to use tractors, we had to plow the soil and all this sort of stuff. It doesn't work. Okay. Or at least the plowing is not good for most tropical soils, especially drought soils. Okay, so green manure cover crops, plants, whether they can be trees, they can be bushes, they can be climbers, crawlers, we don't care. They can be water holders. Okay. But they have to be plants that farmers are using, among other reasons, to fertilize the soil, control weeds, or overcome droughts. Because that's the definition that we use for green manure cover crops. And we don't use them the same way. I mean, in the United States, a green manure, when they used to use it, was something where you'd monocrop a legume for a month and a half or something like that, maybe 2 months, and then you'd plant your regular crop. Well, how many farmers here are going to wait 2 months after the rain starts to plant their crops? That's a formula for disaster. Okay, so we don't do that. In the States, they say you have to cut everything down in flowering time. Well, if I'm growing lab beans there that produce 23% protein and are highly edible, they're more nutritious than any of the common beans that came from Europe or the United States, and you tell me to cut them down when it's flowering? I got your minds. Furthermore, they produce Lab, for instance, produces 100 up to 140 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. Jack bean produces 240. Okay, some of the ones we use in the Andes, a lupin that we use in the Andes called tari, produces 400 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. We don't need all that. In fact, with tarweed, we have to plant it well spaced so that we don't get an excess of nitrogen. Okay, we don't need all that nitrogen. Okay, so we can go ahead and harvest beans off these plants and still put them in the ground. If they're perennials, they'll still have a lot of nitrogen there. Now I realize that which the states say, well, you harvest the beans off, you don't have any nitrogen left in your plant. Well, now if you're working with a legume, apparently they never experimented with a perennial legume. Because if a perennial legume loses all its nitrogen, it's dead. Okay? So I mean, you know, there's a lot of nonsense in those books. Okay, so we can lose, you know, with lab, we can lose over half the nitrogen in the plant and still get a really, really nice maize crop the next year. Okay? For smallholder farmers, maybe not for a Midwest farmer. He's producing a lot more, so he does need a little more nitrogen. But we can go down to 60% of the nitrogen that lab produces and produce the best crop you ever saw in the United States. Or close to it. Okay, these green manure cover crops can do a whole lot more than just those three things I talked about. Fertilize the soil, control weeds, and overcome droughts. I'll do this rather quickly because most of this doesn't have to do with droughts. But anyway, they can triple present yields of basic grains for the vast majority of smallholder farmers. We can very easily go from 1 ton to 3 tons per hectare of maize. Very easy. Now it takes 3 or 4 years. It's not going to happen immediately. In fact, to triple it, it usually takes about 5 years. To double, we can usually double yields in 2 years. Well, by the 3rd year, 2 years of using the leaves on the soil. So by the 3rd year, we should be able, if we aren't doubling people's maize yields by the 3rd year, something's wrong. We're not doing something wrong. Okay, these same plants can produce a large quantity of additional food rich in proteins. Now, not all of them. Jack bean can't, lab can't. I think one of the best green manures for this area, for Belize, is going to be pigeon peas, which in Spanish is gandules. They are edible. Pardon?
Gongo beans.
Pardon?
Gongo.
Oh, they're called gongo beans here? Oh, that's why nobody's going to understand the pigeon. Oh, gongo. Oh, okay. I'll try to remember that. Yeah, and they have different names in Panama too, that want to do. Anyway. Pardon?
What is the genus name?
Cajanus. Cajanus cajanus. C-A-J-A-N-U-S.
Where's the native?
Where is it native? Boy, you got me on that one. I think.
Somewhere in the top.
Yeah, I think it's from Asia because I don't think it's native to Africa, and it was mostly brought here by slaves that were brought over here from Africa, from West Africa.
Inoculation all local, right?
Pardon?
Yeah, inoculation all local, right?
Well, it usually does well. Now, once in a while, the first year it won't grow well, but then just plant it the second year because the presence of the roots will dramatically increase the amount of rhizobium. So by the second year, you'll get it. Pardon? Oh, it's 18. Okay. I was right about 18. Okay. Okay. Some of these, like the, well, not so much. The pigeon here, gogo. Some of them will grow right into the hunger season, so people will reduce their hunger season. Some of them are so, we can, like there's a 60-day cow feed we use all over Africa that will shorten your hunger season at the end by a month because it comes in a month earlier than anything else. So that's something. They can also help reduce the labor need to control weeds. They can reduce the impact of droughts by up to 80%. I've already said that. They can sequester carbon in the soil long term at a rate of up to 1.5 tons per acre per year. And this is going to be very, very important in the future. I think for my own organization, for instance, we figure that once we can prove this is what we're doing and at the cost we can do it, we'll be getting most of our money in Africa from European environmentalists, not from development. Development people just don't have the money, but because we're going to be working all over the continent. And but the European environmentalists, when they realized we can sequester more carbon than anybody else in the world can sequester using any other system that I've been able to find out about to do the arithmetic, they're going to be knocking on the door. I think if any of you are working with organizations that really plan to scale up in the future and become large and have a major impact, you better start thinking about carbon sequestration, because that's where the money's going. They can sequester, okay, they can produce a good deal of other products such as firewood, medicines, year-round fodder, rodenticides, it goes on, depending on the species you're using. Like, for instance, the Gliricidia tree that we use for what we call dispersed shade. I think there's another term for it here, but you know, like, Madre de cacao, yeah. Gliricidia is Madre de cacao, well, it's got lots of names in different places. Madrigal. Pardon? Madrigal. Yeah, in several Central American countries it's Madrigal. In Honduras, even when we walk the G, it's just Madrigal. Oh, okay. Okay, so that's enough of that. Mark?
Are people selecting crops for their ability to take advantage of these high CO2 levels within our world? Some plants do respond. Every plant responds to C3. So are you selecting for plants that respond to high CO2?
No, actually, we aren't that sophisticated. And, you know, these are the sorts of things we've purposely taken sort of a strategic approach to this whole thing. We started in 1980. We thought maybe we'd find 6 or 8 good species. In fact, there's over 100, like I said. But we started out with maize and sorghum and millet and cassava, crops that are the most widely planted in the world, except for rice. Rice we haven't tackled until just recently because of the problem most of the rice is flooded, and you know, finding plants that can grow in flooded fields is a real problem.
Maize is C4 though.
Pardon?
Maize is C4 doesn't respond to C4.
Well, actually, millet and sorghum respond less than maize does. Maize responds quite well to increased fertility. Is that what that is?
CO2.
Oh, CO2. I really don't know. I'm afraid that's just... Oh, okay. Yeah, I know the C4. Okay, well, did everybody hear that? Speak up.
CO2 now has exceeded 400 parts per million, and all plants don't respond to that. We're fertilizing plants with our extra CO2, so we should be selecting plants that take advantage of that. And corn being a C4 plant does not respond as readily to high CO2 as a C3 type.
The thing is that I've worked almost all my life in areas where maize was the dominant crop, and people love eating maize. You know, tortillas in Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, or encima in Kenya, or whatever. And all over Africa, maize is probably the most important subsistence crop.
All beans are.
And so we work largely with maize. We start where the farmers are, and we move on from there. And so I think that's a good principle for any extension program. And so therefore, we're still working. I mean, we're working with all sorts of different crops around the world, but maize is one of the major ones. We don't try to change the crops farmers are already growing. We try and make it possible for them to produce a lot more of what they're already growing. In fact, there are movements in Kenya and Tanzania to get farmers to stop growing maize, and they've been total flop. Because I mean, that's what people like to eat. There's one place in Tanzania where I've seen people now eat a lot of millet and they like it. But you know, in most of Africa and most of Central America, I wouldn't want to be responsible for changing people, you know, telling people that they can't grow maize anymore. In fact, one of the most interesting things in Honduras was, this is off subject, but we learned that by far the best way to get people to, because the government and everybody else wanted people to diversify their crops, you know, get out of maize and grow something that was worth something, worth more money. And we found that by far the easiest way to get people to diversify was teach them how to grow more maize on the land they have. Because then when they had more of the maize than they could eat, they'd try and sell it. And the price, of course, was lousy. And so then they'd come to us and they'd say, hey, you know, I'm only going to plant maize on half my land this year because I can grow all I need to eat. My family needs to eat on half my land. What can I plant on the rest of it to, you know, have some money to buy school books and medicines and stuff? And so we found that within 2 years of working in an area, people would, you know, the first year they'd sort of experiment, the second year they'd double or triple their crops. And by the third year, they were knocking on our door asking us how they could do it. There was a felt need among the farmers, so that's trying to push it. Okay. Okay, you can't see this very well. What I'm doing is wrong. Here you can see two whole fields. You can see a tremendous difference in the productivity. Here you can see the same field. The one farmer is right here. This is her maize after 2 years of green manures, and this is her maize before 2 years. Those of you who are up close enough to see it, like this, you'll see there's a tremendous difference. The lower maize will probably produce, well, I don't know, 200 kilos per acre or something like that. The upper one will produce a ton and a quarter per acre. Okay, are you still having problems with what you said? Okay, now these two photos, I wish I had some way to really show them. Well, this is a photo from Madagascar. It was a bad drought. You see the maize planted widely apart. Some of the maize died, and the rest of the maize is, you know, this high and suffering badly from drought. Okay. You'll be lucky if he gets half a ton per hectare, or she, I should say. You'll be lucky if she gets half a ton a hectare. If you look over here, you'll see there's a dark green patch. And also, if you look up here, there's a cloud in the sky. So, and you can see by the shape of that cloud, here it is again. Same cloud, the field 30 meters away. Okay? Now this one doesn't look like it's had a cloud. See it? Same farmer, same practice, except for one intervention. One difference between these two fields is that one of them has had a green manure cover crop planted in for 6 years. The other one is the first year she planted. Okay, you can see these little bushes down here. That's it's a 12-month cow. Okay, actually it's a 9-month cow. They planted late, so it's still green the next year. This one has had it 6 years. The other one had it since the first year. That is drought resistance. And in fact, she was getting in this field, because of the drought, she was getting about 80% of the production she'd get in a good year, which is 3 times what all the other farmers get in a good year. Okay? So she was getting 2.5 times, you know, with the 80%, with the 20% reduction, she was getting 2.5 times what all the other farmers got in a good year, and she was getting it in a bad year. This is what can happen. I've seen this happen in a traditional system in Mali. I've seen it happen with the 9-month cowpea in Madagascar. I've seen it with Lyricidia alley cropping, introduced by an NGO in Zambia. What else? I mentioned Mali. Oh, and in Honduras. I've also seen it with jack bean. I mean, this can be done with any of the green manure cover crops we've ever worked with, as far as I know. You can go from, you know, getting virtually nothing in the drought year to getting 80% of what you get in the good years, and what you get in the good years is going to be 2 or 3 times what everybody else gets. Okay. That is possible everywhere I've seen green manures being used well for over 6 years. We have places in Malawi, in Kenya, in Tanzania, and Ethiopia that are going to be that way in a year or 2. They're already showing real good resistance to drought. If you have any questions, please bring them up. Okay? Yeah.
Can you do intercropping with green manure and corn, for instance?
Almost always. That's almost always the way we do it. We don't put green manures on, we don't rotate very often, because then you're wasting land. You're using land to grow nothing that people can eat for a while, or sometimes the green manures produce food. But no, we produce them right in the maize field, or in the cassava field, or the millet field, or whatever. Yeah, absolutely. The vast majority of the time. Now sometimes, like here, I think there's quite a number of areas where there's enough rainfall, so you can go ahead and rotate by putting your green manures in during the dry season when you don't grow any crops anyway. But we don't take land away from, you know, maize or something like that in order to grow green manure. Farmers won't do it. They just won't do it. They're better off probably buying chemical fertilizer.
What is the practical application rotation for a bigger farm, I would say, goes in and corn, soybean, say corn, farm, cows first, puts in rows, plants with a plant testing. I would see my middle process was
Okay, I'll give you an answer in a minute. But the first thing I want to say is if you want somebody who's really an expert, because see, I only work with smallholder farmers. When I was in college, I wouldn't even learn how to drive a tractor because I didn't want to work with anybody who had a tractor. I wanted to work with the people that need it. The experts on green manure cover crops for large-scale farms and medium-scale farms are right here in Latin America. They come from Brazil. They've taught me a tremendous amount. I've gone down to Brazil 4 or 5 times to learn from them. Although I work with them in these areas where they're working with smallholder. But these green manure cover crops are being used by Brazilian farmers who are farming over 100,000 hectares. Okay? These are not just for smallholder farmers. They can be used very well by large scale. Now it's quite different. They use all sorts of species we would never use because some of those species, a lot of those species are not legumes. They don't just restrict themselves to legumes because their farmers have enough money to buy a little urea to balance out the lack of nitrogen if they're using a non-leguminous green manure cover crop. The smallholder farmers, we can't do that. So they use things like a type of radish that will send the roots down and break up any kind of subsurface hard pan or clay pan. They use, and the radish produces about twice as much biomass per month as tuna does. It's unbelievable, but it does. They use lots of different kinds of oats. They use 3 different species of crocolaria. They use all sorts of stuff. Okay? That we can't use with our smallholder farmers.
Second question would be,
Well, let me. Now, there are a few things I do know about large scale farming, and that is that, and again, I've learned it mostly from the business. Oh, but by the way, before I finish that, let me say that I know some of the leaders of this whole Brazilian movement. Some of you already know or have heard of Ademir Calagari. He can be the best you can get. He does charge quite a bit of money. But, these are the people that can show large-scale farmers how to use green manure cover crops, so they know it because right now in Brazil, it's the most amazing in the whole developing world. This is the most amazing, well, it's not just developing. There's more farmers in Brazil today using green manure cover crops than any other country in the world. Okay? Bar none, including the United States. Okay? There are 2 million farmers in Brazil using green manure cover crops as we speak. Along with, they talk about CA with green manure cover crops, which means they're using zero tillage or minimum tillage. They're using green manure cover crops. They're keeping the soil covered all the time, and they're using quite a diversity of plants. Okay? There are over 2 million Brazilian farmers that are using green manure cover crops on something close to 24 million hectares. Okay? That's an average of 15 hectares each. So you know these aren't all small little farmers. 14 million, whatever. But anyway, 25 million hectares. About 25 million hectares. That's what they call it. Probably not exactly. But it's a huge movement. By far the biggest green manure cover crop movement I know of anywhere. And they're doing a fantastic job. They use about 30 to 40 species regularly. In fact, they have gone way past where we are of using 8 to 10 species at a time, which is exactly what Gabe Brown from the United States and Christine, get her name, in Australia, who are the leaders of the movement in their respective countries of cover crops. They're using 8 to 10 species, and they're rotating their green manure cover crops. Not just their crops, they're rotating their green manure cover crops. They use a different one every year. Well, usually every other year, every third year, something like that. So it is a very different thing, and I won't go into that anymore. But I can give you the email addresses and so forth and recommend you, well, in your case, I wouldn't have to do any recommending, they would love to work with you. Get those guys to come up here, pay what is necessary to get them up here, and they will teach you all about how to do it for large scale. And they have farmers at much more large scale than most of the hardly any farmers here.
The rural field is all full of grass. And where in the what we use the grass part of there? And where do you find
Okay, there are some people here at this conference that have seed or are producing seed each year. And one of the fellows was giving out, Jack. So just look around, ask around. One of the organizations here that are producing different green manure cover crop seeds, there's one organization. What is it?
Central Farm. You can
Farm?
buy them at Central Farm.
There you go. Okay.
They have them.
Yes. Okay. Contact them.
This is the grass.
Basically, I've been told you don't need to do this, but what we do is we just have somebody plow it. Now, that's the last time they plow it. Usually, they plow it, get rid of the grass, because if the grass has been there, now, if the grass has only been there since last year when you planted something, then you're okay. You can go ahead and grow green. If the grass has just a tremendously well-developed root system, it's green manure standard.
Follow-up question was, in the leaves, drought has a special definition. This area, normal dry season runs from mid-February without the end of May. But it goes farmers who call them drawing houses. If you planted normally in November, which catches the end of very light rain, like February, this year, the rains did not come at the end of May, as it's normal, in October. That's what we call it. If you had a green manure cover, and all the small farmers lost their corn and lost their just with a central survey. If he had a green manure cover, would he have been able to still plant in the normal early? What would he have done? That's the question.
Okay. First of all, let me say that the resistance to drought doesn't come immediately. I think I mentioned it in 5 or 6 years. So the first year or two, you're going to have some problems. But I would probably recommend, when the rains come, whenever they come, anywhere from May to October, plant some gomu. Okay? Some gamu. It is quite drought resistant just by nature. But also, what we do is, when we're using it as a green manure cover crop, after we harvest it, we don't cut it down, we leave it standing. We leave the plant alive. And we let it keep on growing, it'll go right through the dry season. And it will, and then we plant our maize again before we even cut it down. Then about 2 or 3 weeks later, it will have a flush of leaves, nice new leaves. Then we cut it off, and we cut it off at this height. Okay? On the top. Okay? Then it will sprout. Okay? All those green leaves that it's been producing since the start of it, go on the ground, that becomes wonderful fertilizer for your leaves. Okay? But the beautiful thing about this thing, you also save seed. You don't have to use seed because it sprouts. But probably the most important thing in this whole thing is, and of course you eat the beans, but the most important thing is, it now has a whole year's worth or 6 months or whatever of root fruit. That means it's almost totally drought resistant. Just like these trees here, they don't die during the drought. They have a big root system. We haven't seen a drought yet in Africa that year-old pigeon peas that have been ratooned won't withstand. In fact, some farmers now in Africa, what they're doing, they're planting a quarter of their pigeon pea 1 year, quarter the next year, quarter the next year, and quarter the third year, the fourth year, so that in any given year, if there's a drought, the newly planted pigeon pea from seed may have serious problems. But 3/4 of their pigeon peas are going to grow perfectly well. Okay, because pigeon pea lasts for 4 years. The fourth year you have a new plant.
So the maize is we can't till them, so there's no till on that sort of plot.
You could probably, well, okay, one thing is that, one thing that's very important to realize about green manures is that you get enough organic matter in there after about 2 or 3 years, there's no reason to till. That's the other labor you save. In fact, in Brazil, the main reason farmers have used green manure is because they want to stop tilling. And so that's the main reason. That's why they worked with things like radishes that produce, like I said, about twice as much or 3 times as much biomass as mucuna, because what they want to do is just fill that soil with organic matter just as fast as they can. They aren't worried about fertility. They want to stop plowing. And by the 3rd year, even using the green manures we use, it's a very slower process, but by the 3rd year, most of our farmers realize they don't need to plow. It's like Bolivar said, you might as well plow here. Okay? In fact, one of the demonstrations our farmers love to do when people are coming from another country or somewhere else to see in Guatemala or Honduras to see what they've done, they'll hand one of the visitors a machete. And they'll say, okay, stab that machete as hard into the ground, push it as deep as you can. Or just stab it in there as hard as you can. So they'll pick a piece of land outside of their field, and the machete maybe will go in that deep, depending on how strong the person is that's doing it. Okay? And then they'll say, okay, now come over in my field, pick any place you want, and stab it in the ground. See, get it to go as far as it can. And sometimes the people fall over because the doggone thing goes all the way down to the hill. Okay? You don't need to plow after you get enough organic. In fact, one of my favorite questions in Africa is, because plowing is not that far back in history, I'll tell them, I'll ask them. Now, back when your father or grandfather and so forth was growing a forest, at some point he cut it down and burned it. And did he plow the land the first year after the forest was there? Oh, no, of course. The soil was so soft. That's what we're doing. We're going to make the soil like that, the soil of the forest. In fact, for some of you that have worked with agroforestry and so forth, we have one of our two most important mottos in Africa, that as we develop our green manure cover crop systems, what we should do is imitate the forest. That's what we want to do, is imitate the forest. The forest doesn't have droughts. The forest, nobody has to plow the forest every year. All this stuff that we do in agriculture because we've damaged our soils. The forest has no problem. You don't have to rotate crops in the forest. Did anybody ever see a forest where all the plants you had there one year you get rid of and the forest has different plants the next year? No. You've got good enough soil, you don't have to rotate. And when you've got enough biodiversity, the biodiversity also helps. Okay? And probably other things. But those are the big ones. So, excuse me, did I answer your question? Okay.
I have a question. I have been working with cover crops for 2 years. Is it a good practice that when you plant your, for example, you plant it this year, maybe in February, 6 months after you cut it, and then you incorporate it in the soil that's not killer. Is that a good practice?
Okay. First of all, now we're not talking about smallholder farmers specifically. I'm not talking about large scale farmers. They have tractors. Small scale farmers, there's no way a small scale farmer is going to incorporate all this material on even an acre and a half in one year. It's just way too much. So we just leave it on top. Like I said, all that idea of cutting it down after a certain period and burying it is to preserve the nitrogen. Here in the tropics, we have species that produce all the nitrogen we could ever use. Much more. Oh, yeah. You can see this model? You know what those are? What are those? Those that are up here close. What are those? What are those? They're in my hands. Huh? Probably never seen anything like that. Unless you dug up some tuna right before it starts producing seed. Those are nodules. Those nodules all happen to be, and I have my hands like that and piled full. Those nodules are all from one mucuna plant. Now, this won't happen in the field because you've got lots of competition. These were farmers in Honduras that just wanted to see what these doggone things could produce. And so they planted one mucuna plant in the field where they've been planting mucuna for like 8 or 10 years. So it would have lots of rhizobium. And they cleared the whole area for about 3 meters around just to see what this plant would do. And they told me what had happened. I didn't believe it. So the next year they did the same thing again. And they had me come and actually watch while they pulled up the mucuna plant and pulled out all those nodules. Those nodules, I know because I saw them do it, are from one single mucuna plant. Now, I know all of you, the reason you couldn't tell what that was is because what you've seen in our textbooks is one root like this, where you had a 1 millimeter in diameter nodule every inch along the root. Well, that's just more fertilizer coming from propaganda. Okay? There's all sorts of tropical plants that produce way more nitrogen than you can fit in those little 1 millimeter balls. I mean, they won't always look like this. They won't always look like golf balls. These are like golf balls here. And even in a good field where they're planted fairly close together, once in a while you'll get a whole golf ball like that on one foot. Usually you don't. But nodulation in legumes is far more than what we've been taught from our textbooks. Once again, fertilizer companies are playing a trick on us. They don't want you to know the competition that they have out right out there in everybody's feet. Yeah.
Organic matter. So and increase soil rainfall filtration. At one point you found that you were raising animals and increasing soil and increasing runoff. Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah. Animals is a whole special issue, and of course with smallholder farmers, especially in Africa, you have tremendous quantities of free-grazing cattle that are out there every day during the dry season, eating everything in sight. So that is a problem we work with. We found some really wonderful live fences, just one of them about 2 years ago that's spreading across Malawi faster than I've ever seen any technology spread across Malawi. I asked a farmer who taught 60 other farmers voluntarily to use this fence because everybody saw how great it was. And I asked him, this was only the second year. I mean, he planted the first fence in the area 2 years ago. Last year, he helped 60 other farmers that saw his fences and wanted some, so he helped them. And I asked him, well, we're selling the seed. We aren't giving it away. I don't think we're giving stuff away. So we were selling the seed. If you don't believe me, read my book. But, I spent a whole chapter on why we should do this. My first book, that's not the one I'm reading first. But, so I asked him, selling the seed at I think it's 40 cents a kilo, something US, 80 cents baby same, I guess. How much seed? I was figuring he'd want 40 or 50 kilos or something. He thought for a minute. He said, well, I need about 8 sacks. This seed is rather small, so that with 1 kilo, you can plant a kilometer fence. Figure it out yourself. How much is 8 50-kilo sacks that seed going to make in terms of fences? And people are going crazy with this fence. Because you plant it once, in 1 year, it's tall enough to keep the cattle out. In fact, in some parts of Malawi, where they know this tree already, they plant it as a cattle corral. They plant it on, that's what they use to fence the cattle in the corral. But anyway, and it'll last for 100 years. And all you have to do is prune it once a year.
What's his name?
It's called monkey thorn tree. It's an Acacia galpini. Pardon? Oh, it is, but not very much. You got to realize a lot of legumes don't fix much nitrogen. We're talking about, common beans, they only fix 30 or 40 kilos of nitrogen. They're right there. They basically use all the nitrogen they produce. They aren't least green manure cover crops at all. So, there are a lot of legumes that don't fix very much nitrogen. But yeah,
What was that tree again? I can't see it.
It's called monkey thorn tree. It's native to, as far as I know, native to southern Africa. And it's Acacia galpini, Galpini, I think. Maybe it's 2 I's. I've seen it both ways. Okay? But you're going to have to get it from Africa. I don't think it exists here. At least I'm not aware of it existing here in Latin America.
I just work in Malawi occasionally.
Pardon?
I work in Malawi sometimes. So.
Oh! Give me your email. We'll get together in Malawi. That case I was just talking about was in Malawi, if I didn't mention it.
No, you said Malawi.
Okay. Okay, we're going to have to break. How much time do I have left?
Well, we're actually over time.
Oh!
Well, let me shoot to the side, and you can answer questions there. Let's give Roland much.